We'd like to call the Greenville City Commission Downtown Master Plan Workshop meeting to order. We only have one agenda item, but it's the Downtown Master Plan discussion. So we'd like to turn it over to Joseph and Joseph. Before I do that, I want to thank you for your attendance and your support of our efforts to improve downtown Denver.
Nine. All right, well, great. Well, here we are, after a long time. We started this in December, I believe, and got interrupted, and then we got back. But I think in the big scheme of things, it's been good to stew on this for a long time and get a lot of ideas from a lot of people. And so I'm really excited about talking about this today, and I'm anxious for your input. This is a draft presentation. Not everything is totally finished and fine, but all the ideas are here and presented in a way that I think you can understand them. I know that you'll have a natural desire to ask questions, but it's a pretty long, and there's about 90 slides I have to go through, and it's all kind of linked together. So I'm afraid if we stop too many times and get distracted, that we'll either not get through it or we'll not see the big picture. Because part of the story is it is a big picture with a lot of parts that need to be considered at one time. So we did, over those months, we're provided with a lot of information from local input sessions, several of them, and I interviewed almost 50 people personally in one-on-one interviews about things and getting their impressions and what they thought about things. And one of the questions I asked everybody before they left those meetings was, do you enjoy living in Danville? And they all said, nobody said, yeah, but there's, I like them okay. Everybody said, oh, no, I love it, really, I love it. So that's the spirit with which we're moving forward. And the whole point here is to find ways to make changes that will change the arc of the downtown in terms of the number of people that are active in it and the number of businesses that can drive there and the energy that can be generated by making some positive change. So I got it. There you go. So after that, we've set the stage here for cooperation. And I wanted to point out a couple of things at the beginning here, what you're going to see. This master plan, if it is ultimately adopted, or aspects of it are, it is an aspirational document. It is where we want to go. It is a conglomeration of innovative, bold ideas that I think, and it's a roadmap for maybe how to achieve those things, and it's a way to focus all of you and a lot of other people and institutions and companies and what have you to focus on the goals, keep those in mind, and move forward and unite the public and private sectors in doing so. And so I know that the first question everybody wants to ask is how are we going to pay for that? And we'll get to that at some point. But I think the important thing here is to understand that it is aspirational. It's trying to put forward ideas that I hope you have, some of them I hope you haven't thought about. But on the other hand, I want to talk about what it is not. It is not urban renewal. You're going to see things where we are talking about putting facilities or buildings or streets or whatever on other people's property that we don't own. And that doesn't mean that eminent domain will be involved or the clearing, public clearing of space will be involved. I think it should be assumed that it's a guidance and strategy for completion over time, and we should work with all the people that are involved, including those landowners, to do transactions that are a win-win situation. There are three guiding principles. The first and very important one is to connect people, places, and the culture. So connectivity is a theme that will run throughout here. It is the idea of not only connecting them physically, but through activities and gathering and hospitality spaces and dining facilities and what have you, that it gives us a sense of community that we can all be connected together. And small town America historically provided that. And we want the downtown, reimagined downtown of Danville to provide an environment in which people have those connections and those the familiarity is able to flourish. We want to make streets for people. Danville, there's an issue with walkability and also just the quality of the pedestrian experience and the safety of the pedestrian experience. So we're going to address those things, but the main point is to make them for people, make them not only physically safe and physically viable in terms of the walking ease and all of that, but also the pleasure of it, doing things that make walking around pleasurable and the amenity of being in a small town. There are a lot of opportunities for reducing the amount of asphalt and surface level parking that you have in the town, and to try to find ways to put infill buildings and infill activities on some of those, so that there's so that you're not losing anything, but you're gaining those spaces that can be restaurants and can be shops and can be offices and what have you. So it's the infill idea is that we need to provide more density. And it also is important not only to provide density in terms of downtown facilities like businesses and hospitality, but also for housing. I think it's very important that we talk about and we really push the idea of attracting more and more people in a denser way to live in the downtown. Now, synergy, to understand what our idea here is that this is all of these ideas are presented together. And they're all dependent on one another. So we can't say, okay, we're going to pick this up, we're going to fix that street, or we're going to do this one thing, and let's see what happens. I don't think that's the way this would work. So everything has to kind of start fitting together. Glad my boss is here. So these are some of the things we want to try to accomplish. We want these stronger connections between parts of town, easy access, easy walking. We want more charm, we want more bars and restaurants, we want better sidewalks, and we want more retail shopping, we want a grocery. Well, we also want these other things. We want trails, and we want a closer synergy with the partnership with Center College, more multi-family housing, and improved streets. And we want these things. And so all of these together, we want to have a closer relationship with the medical center, and we want to have more parking, and we want to have more retail shopping, and a new park. And all of these things, if you're trying to attract people to live downtown, many of these things are what will make that possible. If you try to just build some apartments and then say, they're going to move in now. I mean, this is what, and then restaurants, people living downtown are much more important to a downtown restaurant than people who live elsewhere, because they're going to use them more frequently, and they're going to get carry-out from them, and they're going to walk to them. So it's that synergy and the ease of connections that we want to try to build here. So all of our ideas are linked together. So now we want to connect people, places, and culture, and the strategies for that are to, you want to go over? Designate downtown as a launch point for regional tourism, and we want to have a planned trail system, and we want to integrate wayfinding and storytelling throughout the downtown. And we're trying to understand and trying to map out and trying to figure out ways that some of these peripheral things can be used to the benefit of downtown.
Yeah, I think as we think about downtown, can everybody hear me okay with this on this one? As we think about downtown, it's important not to just focus on that small physical space. And as Jim's been talking about, it's about creating greater connections. So for us, as we think through these strategies for downtown going forward, we wanted to start kind of at the highest level. So thinking about how people experience downtown Danville. One of the ways, I think, for us, as we came in with fresh eyes, was downtown Danville is really a jumping off point for the region, for the county, for Boyle County, and for a lot of the towns and cities around here. You know, it shows up on the website, it shows up where a lot of the attractions that you all are talking about, people visiting, are in and around. And we thought, well, what if Danville became that center, the center hub, or continued to be the center hub for those sorts of activities? As people are trying to learn about the town and the city, where do they go? What's the first place? So these are just things to kind of get thoughts going. One of the ideas here was just downtown becoming a jumping off point for the region, but also for people to learn about the city and town itself. The case study that we had highlighted in here, just to kind of start to think about how this has been done other places, is thinking about in downtown Lexington and Visit Lex, their center for tourism. They've got a beautiful space, but it's, I think like Jim's already been talking about, it's next to bars, restaurants, it's next to a plaza where they hold Thursday night events every single week. It's in the heart of the city. And so thinking about that for Danville, what is that space? Is that Constitution Square and the old Grayson's Tavern building? Is there a thing that can happen there where anybody that comes in from out of town goes right to that spot and they can figure out, okay, here's exactly where I need to go. Here's how I can start to think about the history of this place. Here's where the events are happening. A lot of these things are already happening. It's really just about coalescing them and thinking about the physical space to allow those things to happen. Go ahead to the next one. Oops, I think you skipped one.
Is that hair trigger?
This one, trails for tourism, trails for safety. So one of the big experiences, and I'm an unabashed supporter of trails in all of our work, and thinking about how people move around the region. I think it's important here in Danville to understand, one of the first statements that we said when we got here was Danville is the 2-mile city, which for us, that was important because that meant you could live really, I think right now what you might think is on the edge of Danville, but if you're only 2 miles from the center, that's a totally bikeable distance. So people could realistically be a faculty member at center or work at the hospital and not need to own a car. And that's totally unique and a really amazing strategic advantage if the infrastructure is right. And I think part of what we saw early is there aren't a lot of trails, and the trails that we do have aren't really meeting kind of the minimum requirements to make them really useful for people. So things like understanding how wide those pathways need to be, or to those of us who are familiar with the bike lanes on 3rd and 4th Street, those are dangerous bike lanes. They're not comfortable spaces to be. People like me might ride on them, but I'm not riding on that with my 4-year-old, right? So it's kind of all in the details about what trails mean and where those go. And so when we start to think about how we connect everybody back to downtown, whether you're talking about center, whether you're talking about the distillery, Millennium Park, all of these things could be a part of a really highly connected trail network. But it needs to be done in a way that's extremely useful. It doesn't have to be super expensive. It needs to be behind the curve. It needs to be something that anybody could use, no matter how old or young you might be, or how great and comfortable you feel on a bike. And that was a really big one. The case study here is a really small town called Loveland, Ohio, that's really done this. And the reason I chose this is In the case study images, you can see that their businesses actually started to reorient to the trail and treat the trails like front doors. And you can see all the bikes, and it's a very rural, small town. So that's something that's totally capable and possible in a place like Danville. And this was, again, to Jim's point, when we've got all these institutions, I had a great conversation with center students when we first got here about how often they come downtown and how they come downtown. The kids that we were talking to, I love that I can call them kids now, so they talk about how they drive downtown because there's always enough parking. And it's so close. It blew my mind that they wouldn't just hop on a bike or just walk, and it's because it's so easy. I think for not just center, but the beautiful neighborhoods that are around downtown, the hospitals, the big job centers, we really need everyone to feel like they can walk everywhere or want to walk everywhere. And that is directly related to the experience of walking, what that feels like. So when we're walking around downtown right now, I had a lot of great conversations with people at the coffee shop about this exact topic. It doesn't feel safe to cross Main Street. It doesn't feel, there's a lot of places where we need crosswalks, where roads are a little bit too wide and cars are flying through. When you look at the traffic volumes, the bypass isn't getting as much traffic as you're still getting through downtown. And what we're creating is an environment where people feel more comfortable, feel safer to get into a car. And we've got so much parking in and around downtown, it's easy, so why not? But I think, to Jim's point about we want restaurants to thrive and we want to attract people to come live and have that dynamic downtown living experience, we need to be looking at how can we make small strategic investments in infrastructure really within like a mile of downtown. Just pick a focus area and really start to look at that. You can do this with permanent infrastructure, curbs, curb extensions, things like that. You can also do it with things like paint and coats. It doesn't have to be expensive to start to have to make dramatic improvements. And something we've talked a lot about with Earl is, providing some of those spaces along the street for people to sit. That has been one of my pet peeves on Main Street. We have this beautiful, the postcard view of the city. It's the thing everybody is so proud of. But there's never really a spot on Main Street where you can stop and take it in comfortably. And that doesn't need to cost a lot of money. There's a lot of ways to start to do that, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So these are case studies from kind of all over, but lots of examples for both short-term and long-term ways to start to address those issues. And this one I thought, personally, would hopefully strike a chord the most. It was about Danville is historically bold, right? This is a town that everybody is so proud of. Like from start to finish, we've heard about the history of the city. We've heard about how proud people are of all these major moments in Kentucky's history of the state that have happened here. But I think that there's a lot of opportunities to do more, to tell more stories, and have a more inclusive historical telling of the city that includes kind of all of the citizens, all of the people from around Danville. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. So, we talked with Michael Hughes from the African American Historical Society, and he's done a great job of collecting all this amazing history and photographs about 2nd Street and about the African American history in Danville. But it's all kind of locked away, right? It's all in that building. He's now got his space and he's making improvements. But I asked him, well, what's keeping you from doing what you really want to do? And he said, money. And to me, I was like, oh, well, that's the only thing. Like, let's do this, because these don't have to be expensive ideas. In Midway, Kentucky, you'll find just little signs around town that tell the history of the buildings. You'll find spaces and places that tell, the stories of the people, the stories of the physical structures of the spaces, and those can be multi-layered stories. Constitution Square is an amazing example of a place that has a very layered history, and not all of those stories are clear to people. Michael Hughes, I'll just keep using him as an example. He said, I bring kids to this space to try to tell them what used to be here, but I really have a hard time because they can't see it. And I said, well, that, to me as a designer, that was like, oh, well, that's a great challenge for us. How can we help people see history, make history immersive and exciting, and really integrate it into the fabric of the city in more ways than, the big historical markers that you see that, if you're like me, like I'm embarrassed to say, I I never stop and read those. So how do we think about making that more interactive? And there's other things like community storefronts. There's cities that are taking vacant space that we might have access to that might not be utilized right now, and making it a place where you can just go learn about neighborhoods, learn about history of communities, host events, those sorts of things. Those might be temporary sorts of ideas to activate a space downtown. Down here is a project we did in Louisville called Resurface, and that was just a temporary activation of what was beautiful buildings, but really became a parking lot. And we brought a lot of activity and kind of physical improvements there just to activate that space. We'll talk about some ideas about that too, but it's about telling stories, looking back, looking forward, and then thinking about a lot of different ways to do that. The second kind of major strategy for us, which we've already started to talk about connecting people and places, is about making streets for people. And I use that phrase very specifically, and I think you all probably all know why you're in this room. But we as a society have essentially made streets for cars and to move cars and trucks and things as quickly as we can because of the metrics that we use to measure success. And I think we could all probably agree to some degree that if we stand on Main Street or try to cross Main Street at 3rd and 4th or walk along 3rd and 4th, that those aren't successful streets. They're successful maybe for some things, but for the people who live in downtown, they're not. And so what we wanted to do is think strategically through downtown, how can we improve key corridors and streetscapes? What are those places? How can we create space for activity? So I think right now there's a few plazas and things, but generally along the streets there's not a lot of space for activity. And we talked at the very beginning of this process about how much energy in downtown Danville is locked inside of buildings, and if you don't go in them, you don't know it's there. How do we pull that energy out to the street so that everybody can see it? And that has a lot to do with encouraging active land uses in storefronts along key corridors. So thinking about, in specific places, do we want to try to discourage parking as the use that's along the street? Bring uses to the street? Do we want to think about different land use types? We need banks. They're extremely important, but they don't do much for activation on the street. And thinking about like the different times of days when we want downtown Danville to be really active, think about when uses are active. So banks are active during business hours, lawyers' offices at business hours, but at night those are totally vacant spaces, right? So how do we balance that out and think about that as a downtown? For us, I'll walk through a few of these. We really focused on Main Street, 3rd, 4th, and Walnut. On the streets we really wanted to zoom in on. For us, for Main Street, it was put it on the big stage. Let Main Street be what I think we all already say that it is. Because of, everybody here knows, Google Danville, that's what you see. You see Main Street every single time. But we really need to, I think about how can we tame Main Street? How can we make it safe? How can we make it easier to cross? And again, how can we allow that energy to spill back out onto the street? These are just an early diagram just to show you've already got the space. I think Earl did a wonderful job with the restriping plan about capturing some of that space. When you work with the Kentucky Department of Transportation as much as we do, you know that the design standards that they usually operate in are generally geared towards state highways and things, not a downtown streetscape. And so you've got a unique challenge here because this really is kind of a state highway, right? It's a major thoroughfare for people who are traveling, but it's also got to operate for downtown. So some of the ideas that we wanted to find is these kind of purple blobs are just saying, recapture this space. The lanes are a little bit too wide. At every intersection, we can take asphalt away and give it back to the pedestrians. What that's doing is it's making crosswalks much shorter. It's making pedestrians much more visible. It's making trucks that come through downtown have to slow down to take turns. Right now, with how wide these intersections are, trucks and cars can take them almost at full speed. And that's one of the most dangerous things that we've got going on. So how can we can do that in a way that works for everybody. we start by just looking at the dimensions. So up here you can see how long we are. We have 12-foot drive lanes, we have parking spaces, we have that kind of flexible zone on the sides, that like 3-foot striped off area. We have the center lane in the middle. So I think part of our ideas was how can we reallocate some of that space to still have parking, still move traffic through, but capture some of it. So what we started to do was think about that, taking away that flex space, that 3 feet, give it back to the side, or for now use it as a safety measure so we could add things like parklets and cafe spaces or bike parking and those sorts of things in strategic locations, not necessarily everywhere. Because I think we are in Kentucky still. People are going to need to and want to drive everywhere. So we have to balance those ideas. But we can test them out. That's something we've been really excited about talking with Earl about is, streetscapes are expensive. And they're major investments that last very long periods of time. So how can we test some of these ideas out first in strategic locations? These are just a few photos to show you. It has been done very well all over the world, small towns, big cities. And really what we're talking about when we're talking about those small early investments is things, again, as simple as planters and paint. And you can see what's happening here is just a few parking spaces, maybe 2, maybe 3 are being taken away there. But you can see how much space is being given back to a restaurant. Think about the impacts of COVID on restaurants right now. Everybody is screaming for more square footage to get more customers into their businesses, to allow people to feel safe and comfortable. These are ways to do that. And there are also ways to shorten crosswalk distances. And frankly, to bring more landscape, more softness to the street to allow people to have that kind of fun and comfortable space. You can see here, these things can happen really inexpensively, or you can make them as expensive as you want. They can be pieces of art in their own right. But it takes a lot of coordination, it takes a little bit of foresight, and it takes synergy between adjacent property owners or businesses who want these things to come together with Earl and his team to figure out who wants these sorts of things, who wants to try them out, how do we do it. So this is just a quick diagram. It'll probably be hard to read, but this is Main Street today. All these kind of red blobs, that's just the parking. You can see the intersections are as they are. And I just wanted to show you quickly, you can go ahead to the next one, Jim. So in this one, we're showing what happens if you start to repaint some of these intersections. Thinking about in front of the Community Arts Center, if those 3 spaces right in front of it maybe became more public space focused. If the parking spaces in front of the hub, the same thing. If we think about the center turn lane, maybe at an intersection, we can make that a safer spot for people because you can't make this left turn anyways, right? Because you're turning into a one-way. And what we're doing is showing there's still significant amounts of parking. So we're just strategically removing or temporarily painting 1 or 2 spaces at each spot, or where we have a willing adjacent business who might really benefit from having that extra outdoor space. So here on this one, we're just in this quick scheme, there's 6,000 additional square feet of what we're calling amenity space that could be given back just by doing this. We've shown 20 parking spaces in total being removed in this one. But there's flexibility in that, right? So you need to work with the businesses and everybody to decide which ones really need to stay and go. But 20 parking spaces when each one of these blocks has enormous parking lots behind them and there's a parking bay. There's still ample parking. That was short term. Long term, assuming that those things are a success, assuming that everybody gets through it and thinks, oh yeah, this extra space is great, the next step is to make it permanent. To think about concrete curbs, to think about those plaza spaces, to add back. And what you really end up with is an amazing amount of extra space. Today, that sidewalk from front of building to the curb is about 12 to 13 feet, give or take. And if you do this at strategic locations, you can add as much as 8 to 10 feet, which is a huge difference in in how much kind of public space, how much gathering space you can offer on the street, how you can deal with landscapes. We know the trees and the shrubs and all those things. Think about all the different amenities that need to go on a streetscape. Trash cans, benches, trees, all of those things. This extra space allows that to be out of the way. So it allows you to have all those lights, but it allows you a very clear path through, and it allows you very specific space for businesses to capitalize on the street, which is extremely important. So in this more final scenario, what you're seeing is things like center medians that could be planted. You're seeing still parking, but you're seeing all of this purple space where we've really started to take it as much as we can. In this case, we're saying that there's an additional over 10,000 square feet of amenity space that you're adding back to the streetscape with a very similar amount of parking reduction. So it's a lot that can be given back. It's a lot, and it's not just about that public space, but here we've dramatically shortened. We've taken 10 to 20 feet away from crosswalks. When, I always use my example. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. When I cross the street, that's a huge deal, getting across and feeling safe. And thinking about how we connect to 3rd and 4th Streets as well. Yeah, no, sorry, go ahead. Walnut Street, and here we're looking back towards center. Walnut Street really emerged as this, I think, major opportunity to create beautiful connectivity with Center's campus and downtown. The way I really like to think about it in my head is connecting some of Center's, I think, most beautiful open spaces in the Norton Center and on one end, and Constitution Square and kind of the heart of downtown on the other end. And today, if you think about what's in between that, it's really a lot of parking lot access and a lot of service access for the hospital and other things. But that doesn't have to be how it is. The pedestrian environment along Walnut in some places is non-existent. It's been overtaken by parking. The sidewalks in places are smaller and narrower, really, than ADA requirements would typically ask that they be. So we really would like to look at, again, how do you do that? So this is at 4th Street. And you can see this, here's the sidewalk. This little bitty sliver, which we've probably all walked on. So if we're going to make this a real successful connection that's going to encourage people to walk, again, it's about experience. And right now, that experience is all about a car, being in a car, not about being able to walk through comfortably. And we can see we are right across the street from childcare and other land uses that would really benefit from having a much safer, much nicer streetscape experience. Go ahead. And so you can see here today, 5-foot sidewalks, a planting strip in places, parking on one side, and then on the other side, really, as you walk past parking lots, a narrow planting strip and a narrow sidewalk, and thinking about in the future as we continue to think about strategic investments and developments, how can, especially on what I'll call the north side of Walnut Street, how can that be repurposed? How can those spaces be expanded? I don't think we call it a true multi-use trail, but how can a sidewalk be big enough, 10 feet wide, where you could walk or ride a bike, you could push a stroller and still have ample space? And then thinking about, as these parking lots, maybe there's that redevelopment that comes in and creates that beautiful edge so that Walnut becomes this wonderful connection between the university and the city itself. 3rd and 4th Streets, this is one of my favorite photographs, looking from the southern edge of 3rd and 4th all the way into town. So I think it shows how important those roadways are to connecting to downtown, but to me it also screams how underutilized those spaces are. And I know this is one of the things that we talked about really early on. When you look at the traffic volumes on 3rd and 4th Street, they're very close to the threshold where you don't really, it's on a one-way pair scenario, which is very important here. They're very close to the threshold where you don't really need 2 lanes. And that's extremely important because when you don't have a lot of volume and you have extra capacity, you're really creating an environment for people to drive as fast as they want to. And we know, we've all probably been there and driven through here, coming through this curve where it's blind and coming into downtown, people are flying, absolutely flying. And we have Clark's Run and the trail and a park system right here. And so there's things that we need to be thinking about. How can we be both better connecting to downtown, but also slowing cars down, making it safer, and preparing, I think, these streetscapes to help make a more inviting investment scenario down on 3rd and 4th Street as well. Go ahead. So again, what does it mean if we lose a lane? I think we believe, it would warrant a little bit more study, but we believe it would nominally impact traffic because the volumes are so low. So maybe at peak hour you might notice it a little bit, but every other hour throughout the day you wouldn't notice it at all. There could still be parking. There's parking kind of at points, but it really doesn't start getting heavily utilized until you're close to the hospital. You have the bike lane today. So I think for us, that's my point about the trails. That bike lane is not being used, and it's actually working against us because everybody's seeing an empty bike lane. Where what we'd like to be doing is adding that space back to the sidewalk and making that a safer condition for folks. As you can see here again, 2 drive lanes, bike lane, parking, and in this scenario, keeping parking with a drive lane, and then adding, go ahead on to the next one, because I think the photo is probably easier to see. Using that parking, and now we're not going to just redo this whole streetscape, but we can do this with paint and posts. We can try it out. We can add what we would call a buffered or separated bike facility that would be 10 times more inviting and safe, and it would feel better for people to use. And all we're doing is restriping the road in this scenario. There's a lot of different ways to do that. You can do it in 2-way scenarios. You can do it in 1-way scenarios for the bikes. But we're already effectively shortening crossing distances. We're slowing cars down because that perception, when you drive down a narrow road, there's cars parked on both sides and it feels narrow, you slow down. When there's trees planted, that sort of thing. So this is having that sort of same effect here. And then long term, after you've gone through that, you've seen that it can work, you've seen or measured the traffic volumes and the city didn't fall apart, then you build it permanently. Then you think about moving those curbs out, you think about the stormwater infrastructure. What we would be doing is saying, have a much more generous landscape verge on the edge. For urban trees to survive, 4-foot by 4-foot squares aren't enough. And what you see is that trees only survive on an average 7 years, which means every 7 years you're reinvesting in that instead of, and you're missing out on the true benefits of trees, which happen after 7 years, when they get big and provide canopy. So we're talking about adding extra landscape. We're talking about those sidewalks becoming 10 or 12 feet wide. Again, now people can ride bikes safely and they're out of the way, out of harm's way of the traffic. And that streetscape, again, is creating a beautiful front door for redevelopment, for future investments that might come down the road. We're also want to acknowledge, in all scenarios, a Walnut and these, there are utilities. There's a lot of complexities with these things. So you'll notice on these, we strategically stayed on the side of the road that has the fewest utility poles complex, that sort of thing. So there's those details that would need to be worked through, but it's totally doable and not insurmountable. And these are the more permanent sorts of solutions. Again, thinking about getting that separation from the roadway, that additional green space. You don't have to have all the plantings. I think some people see that and think, maintenance costs. But you can do lawn and trees, and that can create a very beautiful streetscape. You can do this with asphalt. It doesn't need to be expensive. I'm a proponent of using simple, inexpensive materials, because eventually somebody's going to have to dig up the pipe underneath this and come back and replace it. And they never do that right when it's pavers. Never do it right. This can be done just as simply in a one-way scenario. Again, you'll see, and this is how it's done all over the world, where we're providing that separation of space from the roadway, but providing very clear and safe places for people to walk and bike. You want to jump back in? So the last piece, so now we've talked about kind of the big picture, connecting the city back to the region and connecting in a big way. We've talked about the streets downtown. And to us, that final piece was about taking that framework that we're building and infilling blocks, lots, and buildings themselves. So we know, from our work with the Kentucky School for the Deaf, there's an enormous amount of opportunity around there. We know looking at downtown and some of the big blocks, there's a lot of opportunity. And we know looking at the beautiful historic buildings, there's a lot of small opportunities within those buildings themselves for adding activity, adding new uses, and activating a lot of these spaces. So we've talked about 4 key things. Activating underutilized public open spaces. That could be both the plazas, parks that we have today, but also thinking about other places where you don't have activity, like parking lots. You'll see, I'll give a few of those examples at the end of the presentation. Jim will talk about creating in the downtown entertainment and business district and thinking about that. Ways to support adaptive reuse, and then creating a plan for redevelopment overall that creates cohesion amongst the major institutions that we do have in Danville, and balancing that and finding the synergies with the needs of the city and your community.
And I think I pointed out that these open spaces and park-like spaces are increasingly important as you make a more dense living environment downtown, where more and more people are living there and needing to have some place to walk to and use to recreate and have a city park experience. So, looking at that whole map, we're having a little trouble saying, okay, well, Danville this and Danville that. We have these strategies for connections and so forth, but we finally had this idea of thinking of it as different districts. Now, these aren't zoning districts, and these aren't official government districts. These are sort of character similarities in places that are doing a certain kind of function. And they each have unique features, and we're discovering that each have unique opportunities, and they also all have certain drawbacks, obviously, but the whole infrastructure of the streets, connecting things with better pedestrian paths, now we got to think of what we're connecting to. So we're going to talk about these character districts. And here what they are. We have Center College District. They get their own district. We have what's called the Civic District. We have the Iconic District. We have the Medical District. We have the East Entry District. We have the South Entry District. And we have the KSE Campus, which we would like to propose looking at as sort of a planned unit development for future as land may come available or not. So, this is Center College District. And it's basically, one of the big goals that we talked about is trying to connect to Center. And by that we mean that there's more, not only more programs and things that will use downtown by the college, but also make it easier for people who live downtown and visit downtown to use facilities that are on that campus. And next. So here are kind of, these are the big ideas. We have a lot of ideas, but these are the ones that would fit on the slide. We think it's important to look at Maple and Main and make improvements to that intersection. Possibly a roundabout, possibly just an improvement to it. Every time we talk about the connection between Center and the downtown, there's the question, well, what about the Safeway? So, what about it? Maybe we can find something to do about that. We want to make Norton Center more of a product downtown, and if we do develop some hotels and conference facilities, having Norton's work with us, you could have, have more and more programming in Norton, and more people coming in, staying in the hotel, eating in the restaurants. It's all fantastic. We need a more walkable town connection between the two, and that's where Walnut Street comes so important. He talked about our idea of creating a nice 10-foot wide sidewalk on one side and to maybe encourage more street buildings to be residential in nature, and some of the development that might occur there that would kind of create a row of townhouses as you walk down through, make it a more pleasant experience and connect all the way down in this nice fashion to Constitution Square. Help facilitate campus master plan changes. Brian has given us presentations on kind of what they're thinking about and changes that they're making. So we just want to be a part of that. We want to have the downtown. We'd like that every time there's something come up that one institution wants to do, that they consult each other and say, how can we do it together, or what would make it better for you? It's a marriage. So we want to work jointly to also try to reconcile kind of the chaos that's at the south end of the campus, and to think about getting rid of some unused roadways and whatever. And the other thing is to connect the campus to the overall trail system, which it was not connected to at this point. So you saw this. This is my sketch. It isn't as pretty as the computer ones that they did, but it does point out that, right now you have this condition where you have two driving lanes, you have the parking, you have a 6-foot version, you have a 5-foot walk over here. We're just saying that where we want to end up is we want to have a 10-foot wide walk on one side and not 8-foot wide version, two lanes. There aren't that many parking spaces actually on that street. So that's what that looks like. So Norton's, maybe we could have kind of a cool connection to this trail, and this trail actually is streaming in from outside. Let's say it goes down to Maple, and it goes up, and eventually maybe goes to Perryville Road. It goes out over the old railroad crossing there. It goes to Millennial Park and beyond. A great trail, and then here it's going to continue on down to the Constitution Square. We're also proposing that Church Street be extended to connect to Martin Luther King, to make not a dead end out of the street, and to provide development on either side of the new street. So that trail would come down, and it comes to a point where this is Constitution Square. It comes to a point where it then turns down this right-of-way, which is a city right-of-way, and enters a new park. And the new park is, we discussed a little bit more detail later, but it is a way to have this trail come through and then head south to connect with the southern trails coming into the city. So this park would become a trailhead for all the trails in the city, and provide parking and a way to have a kiosk to show maps and things, so people come with their cars, take their bikes off, figure out the system, take off, and have a good Saturday afternoon. Okay, what about the Speedway? This isn't sanctioned by anybody, but one idea that we're thinking about is explore relocating it to some other place on Main Street, maybe down the east end. But we thought it would be a good location for Brian to build a new administrative building for their college, and it would offer a nice footprint for about a 30,000 square foot office building that would be a great link between, because it's sort of a public use link to people going in there to kind of do the business with the college. And, so that's just an idea. We don't know if it could work, but whatever. So these are the Civic and core and medical districts. Next. So in the core, or in the, the Civic, it says core with a Civic. We want a stronger walking experience around between the government buildings and also to make more of this connection to the library. And you'll see some ideas about 3rd Street later. But we want to encourage, that's a great street to maybe turn into something that it's not today. And so we can make it more commercial and more friendly to the restaurants and that kind of thing if we do some changes. This is a mystery arrow that actually goes to where the new firehouse site is. I made this slide, so there are all kinds of problems with it. But, that's the new firehouse, and then one thing that's really we would hate to see, because all of this is designed to keep what we have downtown and bring more to the downtown. So I think it's very important that we really be concerned about the possibility of moving some part of the courthouse functions out of the downtown, because they provide a huge amount of activity. And down there watching, people come out of that building, a lot of them go across the street to the subway to get a sandwich and then go whatever we're going to do. So I think that what we want to propose is an idea for how to do that. This is the firehouse site, and this is the new firehouse floor plan. And this is a rendering of what it's going to look like. This is City Hall. It's right next to it. Next. Now about the courthouse. So how do we, is there a way to add on to that would solve the problem, solve the space problems? And is there a way to also, if you do that, yes, you can. You can take those parking lots that are east of it and build on it, but then we're already in a kind of a parking problem relating to courthouse activities and city hall activities. So here's an idea. This is at the parking lots today. This is 3rd Street. Courthouse is behind me. This is looking back to the courthouse. So our idea is to add on to the courthouse into the parking lot and to wrap that addition down like so and create a parking garage that would front 3rd Street and connect to the courthouse, so you can go right into the courthouse. And also provide about 8,000 square feet of retail on the 3rd Street side. So this is a little larger rendition. You end up with a little courtyard here. The only problem being you're never going to get any sunlight, but at least it is an open space. And then this is the way the parking would lay out. So this is the look down 3rd Street right now. So what we're talking about is building a parking garage in here and infilling that. This is what that could look like. This is the parking garage. Looking back to Main Street, there's a hub. And we have an opportunity to have this commercial space, could be restaurants, could be whatever. And if it's needed for the courthouse, they could have a lot of their high visitor volume traffic in that space for routine licensure and things like that. So anyway, the idea is to, in all of these side streets, think of ways to try to make them more walkable and more interesting. So the idea would be to have a building that's not too confrontational or not too big, but also provide the street something really interesting on the street. So the town center idea is, what we're looking at now is the core. So the core is called that because it is a chance for us to look at new development and changing the face of that and making it more a part of the downtown. I think that the ideas that we have for it, that we'd like to explore, we'd like to talk about a town center. We'd like to get a hotel. Obviously, we've all wanted, that's why we started the master plan, I think. And I think that it would be great to have new apartments and restaurants, particularly here again, Walnut Street, lining it with the apartments and restaurants and that kind of thing. So we want to consider these possibilities. Today, what you're seeing there are the parking lots. Parking lots take up about 62% of the space of that block. So, and here we're going to talk about throwing people off their property, so I don't want to freak anybody out, but these are aspirations, ideas that could cause us to really want to try to do something bold. The idea of a town center, which we have done 3 or 4, working on the 4th, is that you have a really great hospitality space. On the first floor, you would have a very commodious lobby that you could have functions and receptions. You would have some meeting halls there, enough for 50 people, 25 people, whatever. You could have a gallery where you could feature Stephen Powell, you could feature, rotating exhibits. You could have it be a joint venture with the Art Center across the street. But the idea is that it's a gathering place, it's a center, it's a point of pride for the entire community. And then upstairs, you would have a nice big room that would accommodate 200 people for an event or a wedding or whatever. These are some images of just such places that provide those kind of facilities. And I would think if we would consider it seriously, it would be a great advantage to the downtown, commerce downtown, to businesses downtown, to all your service organizations that want to have meetings someplace. It could be a great place for Ephraim McDowell. And we've discussed that with Dan McKay, and he agrees. And I think the president of the center has also said it's something that they would be really interested in and could utilize as well. So this could be something that the 3 anchors, center and the medical center and the city could maybe put together. So let's talk about, if I could do anything I wanted to do here and wipe the slate clean. This is 34th Street, I'm sorry, and that's Main, and this is Walnut. So I'm going to show you 4 different ways to look at how to put those things on this property. And this is just fun, but let's think about it seriously. So in this case, the hotel would go on the corner. Its entrance would be on 4th Street. There would be a plaza, and there would be the 2-story town center with all its hospitality facilities. There could be restaurants that could be attached to the hotel, but also extend out, and you could have, sort of that outdoor dining on the plaza sort of thing. A parking garage could be constructed for enough spaces to replace what's being taken away, plus what's needed for the hotel and the town center. And it could have retail on the first portion of the facing Walnut. The apartments would be on the 2nd, 3rd floor of a building that would have retail or restaurants on the 1st floor. So this is showing that. Hotel, the restaurants, the garage, new building of apartments, and the town center in Boston. Okay, round 2. hotel on the corner, an entrance from 4th Street in and out to the parking garage, an entrance to the parking garage from Main Street, and there could be one on Walnut as well. So here you have the hotel sort of being and the front of this parking garage here again could have some retail on it facing Main Street, and the hotel would be essentially facing Main Street and have the entrance here on the inside across from the plaza. The town center would sit on the plaza. The apartment building would sit on the plaza, and this retail adjacent to the garage, which would be the restaurant opportunities for outside dining on the plaza, could be arranged so in that way. And there could be retail in this part and next to the garage there. This is showing how that fits together. So this is more of an interior plaza, hotel facing the street, apartments, retail facing water section. Okay, another idea. Maintaining one of the existing bank buildings, which one is
US Bank.
kind of a
US Bank.
U.S. bank.
And PNC.
PNC, I don't know which one it is.
PNC is the
They're
one on the south
next to
side.
each other.
It's a nice building.
Yeah, that's good.
So that's the PNC one. Maybe that could be turned into a restaurant. And maybe the plaza is on the corner across from the plaza, the courthouse plaza. And maybe the hotel fronts that, but also, has its visibility on Main, and its check-in and its access to parking is pretty easy between the parking there. Retail, and here again, the restaurant block there. So, and this doesn't show this, but it could have the apartments as well. So basically, it's the same program. The only thing changed here is we're reusing that existing bank, because it's a pretty nice building and making something interesting out of it for a restaurant. Next. And then this one is the idea of the hotel back on the corner on 3rd Street, access, the parking garage located here, the plaza behind the town center sitting on the plaza, and the retail apartments on the corner. Different iterations of the same, of this, using the same parts. Okay, then what could be the nature of that hotel? Well, I started sketching around the hotel, and they don't want to see my stuff. So anyway, it's trying to find some way that would have an impressive look on that corner. And I think there are ways to do that. Or it could be a little bit more contemporary interpretation, or a mix of the two, but I kind of like the name in the center. I think that has a certain charm to it. Do you like that, Ryan?
Sure. That would cost you a couple million.
Okay, how much do you like? Okay, I'm sorry. What that? What was that? Oh, okay, we're done with that. Okay, so now on the hospitality center, you could do a sort of traditional building, but I think it would be extraordinary to do something that kind of soars on that plaza and makes it, something very different from everything else in downtown, and becomes a beacon to activities. So, the medical center. One of the big things is to try to figure out how to solve the Walnut Street mess. And so we've had discussions with the hospital and their architects, and it's a very difficult problem. But I think there are ways that can be solved, and I think that what we need to do is to really make the city's interest known that has to be, something has to solve that, have all that parking there, which creates if you're gonna have an emergency room there, you can't have all that parking, because every time I've been in there, it's all blocked. I don't think an ambulance could get in there if they had to. So anyway, they agree it's a mess, but we need to try to help them figure a way out. I'd also like to call back some of the surface parking that they own for in downtown, and to help consolidate that into a parking garage that basically would put decks over that existing parking there. And the other thing is to encourage the hospital to expand its services, and also to think of 3rd Street moving up and down. Here's a property that's being considered for medical uses as part of the KSD purchased by the city. But I think, let's think of how we can make the medical center top-notch regional center and more medical activities rather than worrying about all the problems of congestion and so forth. How do we solve that and create more of investment in medically related research and treatments and that kind of thing? So how do we take this regional hospital and help shore it up for the future so that it doesn't become tangential to the bigger systems in bigger towns? And I think it's always going to be a regional hospital, but I think it is, it employs a lot of people. It's very important. We don't want to lose it in the downtown. So let's figure a way to not only keep it, but I guess how do we get some vision for more? And I think 3rd Street, that corridor, there's developable land that could be used for that. That's that parking deck I was talking about on 4th Street. Okay, this is the iconic district. This is the postcard part of town. Of course, we want to encourage and incentivize preservation and maintenance of the historic structures. It's very important. If they're not being taken care of, we need to find ways to incentivize ways to keep them in good shape. I think it still could benefit in a few places from some infill development where appropriate to create, to just fill in a few of the gaps between the teeth. And then there's this issue about what to do about the upper floors of a lot of those buildings. They're either underutilized or not utilized. And so that's an opportunity for more downtown residential. So maybe we could find ways to be a partner in that and incentivize and make it easier for people to develop those buildings more fully. And then, of course, invest in the streetscape ambiance to keep the area's charm, and that goes back to what Lewis presented earlier. This is the familiar photo. And then this is what we call the east entry. And this is, the kind of focus on Main Street really falls off after the Constitution Square. And Main Street, Walnut Street becomes very low-scale residential, as does Martin Luther King. And Main Street does as well. But we do have a problem here, where all these streets come together, and we would like to work something out there. And so that would be one of the things the ensuing more detailed plan might try to figure out. I guess there's no need for any sort of major change, other than to try to, with Steve, with some kind of better guidelines on zoning, whatever, to try to prevent these deep setbacks on the street. In the future, putting buildings closer to the street and parking behind if possible rather than the other way around. So it doesn't look as much like a strip center area down there. But it's not without its charm, and I don't think we need to do a lot of investment. We are suggesting possibly some additional residential on Martin Luther King, part of the residential enhancement program. Okay, the South Entry District that Louis talked about, the major changes to the roads. I would just like to talk about moving from the south to the north. This area is pretty disorganized. It's the kind of front door to your city. It is potentially could be transitioned to other kinds of uses. And here again, we're not talking about trying to get rid of industry that's there and doing well and all that, but as properties become available and switching on, a lot of other towns and cities, these kind of buildings are turned into clubs and breweries and wineries and distilleries or distillery tasting rooms or what have you. So it's looking at that area as what can be done, and then kind of just tidying it up too. What can be done to add some landscaping and add some, kind of making everybody obey the rules about curb cuts and that kind of thing. It's just a sense of kind of, as you come into town, it's kind of like really, I don't mean disrespect, but it's really pretty kind of third world in a way. You come in and there's just all this chaos. So maybe there's a way to organize that. Okay, then over on 4th Street, this is the kind of the medical, really comes down to Russell. Most of these things on 4th are medically related until you get down here, and then there are also a lot of what we would, I don't think Louis calls it that, but this isn't really a word, but kind of a village sense of these smaller, some of them were residential buildings turned into dentist offices and shops and that kind of thing. I think it's, it's okay, it's great. And maybe that could be, kind of become the character, encouraged to how we develop that, but maybe that's the character, it's these small things. It needs a little cleaning up too. There are a lot of curb cuts, people have to come out of there to a lot of different places into the traffic. So I think that what we're saying is it's not bad the way it is. Let's just do everything we can to make that better. I think some tree plantings and that kind of thing can go a long way to make it a nicer village commerce area, which is something I just made up. So then this is something I'd like to talk about in more detail, because this area here between Grant and Russell is made up of small homes on huge lots. And I would like to see us consider ways to, over time, develop that as a major, more high-density residential area, because it is only 3 blocks from the core of downtown, as far as walking there. And I think if there's ever any place we could do something there, it would be there. In the downtown, it would be there, because it would then be so close. Next. So this is, if I look at where we'd like to kind of breathe life into more downtown retail, this is kind of the area. It's not really an area, but it's just, I want to show you anything that could happen along Walnut Street. It could be residential, it would be wonderful. We have this opportunity here, and we have an opportunity maybe over here on the KSD property, if it ever becomes available to do something there. Now, these aren't, first of all, we're not here, I can't really make it sound like we're going to go in there and bulldoze other people's homes down. If they don't want to, people don't want to do anything about this, that's fine. But a lot of those homes are rentals. and they're owned by developer people, and they could possibly jump on board with this. And I think that the other thing is that we're not, if we do some of the things we're doing, you're adding value to those properties. So if people did want to sell the property, it would be of a higher value because it would have a higher use. And so it would be an incentive, you know, so if you have a house that's worth $100,000, you might be able to get $125,000 or $140,000 from a developer who really wants that land to do parks. So this is my idea that, or our idea, I'm sorry, this extension of Church Street connecting Walnut and Martin Luther King is actually Earl's idea. And it was in the other slide that I showed. But I'm suggesting that we take it and extend down all the way down to Russell? Yeah. And that we encourage these areas to be more dense, more urban kind of dwellings, condominiums, apartments, or whatever. And these up here, of course, could also have retail on the first floor. So what I'm talking about is trying to set up, if you did something like this, try to set up a regimen in which the streets that are developing there always have the townhomes face the street, provide a new streetscape, and parking is behind. And can you just imagine if this were townhomes lining this nice parkway street, this a 3-block walk up to the hotel in the town center. So this is kind of what I'm talking about in terms of the character of the buildings that could be developed in those areas along those streets. Something that is urbanesque, but yet of a scale and a charm that brings, making the walking experience down Walnut, down those streets, be more special. And the more special it is, the more people want to live there. This next is an example of developments where they come to the street, you have the retail on the first floor and apartments above. A really nice feel. Walnut Street could be really cool if we had some of that going on. Okay, now we're talking about the KSU campus. And we recommend that we create a planned unit development, or PUD, for the long term. And here again, you're saying, well, that's not land that you own, and you should presume that you do, and that's true, although, you know, maybe there's ways that we could develop some things that are of joint benefit to the school and to the city. And next slide. So, if we look at this, sketch that you've seen before, let's say there's a new park, which could be this whole area. There's a new park on their property, and the area near the historic building, also very park-like, we don't necessarily have to take that land away from it. What we could do is develop a park adjacent to the school that they could use as well. And this shows you how that trail would come down Lewis's new streetscape there and link in to this trail that exists. And this could be the trail that goes on the other side and continues on and eventually goes up somehow to the bike park, which is done in that area. So here's where we're beginning to see how we can tie some things together. And I think we talk about these trails, you're probably saying, why are they so hopped up on trails for the downtown plan? Because walking and biking are two of the most popular outdoor activities. 80-some% of people that recreate outdoors do walking as a part of that. And part of the great popularity of the parklands and Floyd's Fork and Louisville and other parks like that is the availability of these nice, wide, 12-foot wide trails that you can ride a bike on. They're multi-use trails, you can walk your bike. And to connect things, and that you're not on a road, and you can take your family, and you can travel these things, and there are people in our office who do a weekend with their bike rack on the back, and they go to a town or a place where they have those kind of trails, and they ride those trails. And they stay overnight, and they have dinner, and they have lunch. And so it is a huge tourist activity. And I think after COVID, it's just more. I think having the park, having more open space, having more gathering space that's open is going to be really in demand. So if you look at the rest of this property, I can see where here I said, I'm just all for letting the medical, anything we can do to encourage medical innovation along that street, keeping the historic building for public use, and creating a wonderful park that would have some facilities that would make it very great place to go if you live downtown, and a great place to gather if you are having a reunion or something like that. So this is the park. It's beautiful. You have some of the biggest trees in Danville. It's very historic. It's just gorgeous. It shouldn't be tampered with too much. But I think that with this tie to Constitution Square and this new little parkland walkway there, that this park could have the trailhead, the parking for the trail system. It could be the center of the trail system. It would have restrooms, and it would have a reunion pavilion for maybe 100 people for picnics and events. And the historic KSD building will be kept in the public domain somehow. Just recommendations. And then medieval to the extent possible. So, the other thing I want to mention is that the theme of this park, Celebration Park, could be the celebration of and interpretation of the Black history on 2nd Street. Next slide. So if we look at today's proposed and existing and underdeveloped trails, not many of them come into downtown. So I guess the whole idea is, let's figure that out. Have them come in, go to that 2nd Street Park, have a big trailhead, and make it a famous place for people to come and really enjoy Boyle County and along the bike. This is the kind of pavilion I would suggest, something you could have, you could call it a reunion pavilion or something where people could have their family reunions and community gatherings, and the people who live in the downtown could walk over and use the picnic tables to have their lunch. It just could be a really nice amenity in this park setting. That's also associated with some restrooms on the back of it. But it's the gathering. It's the place where you sign in for the marathons, where you have events and people gather, and families come. I don't know. It's just it's kind of you build it and they will come. So I love this place, and I think that the pavilion could be maybe on the side adjacent to the school, so that could be used by them as well. And then, of course, doing everything we can to, that's a source of pride for the school and its long history, and I think it should be celebrated somehow more than it is today. So, also, as you know, there's been great interest in establishing a downtown entertainment destination center, or EDC. And so we are recommending that district, and It is a designated area that would, could be used for alcoholic beverage outdoors activities. And this is the area that's suggested for it, but it becomes clear that if you want to have an event on the courthouse and in this area here, you don't want to close the whole city and to have to get the license to close the whole city for that one event. So what we have done is we have divided this into 5 sub-sections or zones. And these could be also agglomerated together, but there's one that takes in this red one takes in this whole center. The blue basically deals with the courthouse and Arts Center, and this green is the Constitution Square, and the blue is the north side of Main Street, and third and fourth, second and third. And so that's the recommendation, and we submit that for consideration as you go forward. And open to any comments or changes you might want to make, but it's just, it would help for sure bring active events downtown. Those things that Lewis was talking about in other cities where they have pop-up venues. I mean, that always involves beer and things like that. So it's a part of that activity, particularly for college kids. And I think a lot of what started, we're trying to also do is to make the town more attractive to college folks, the students and the faculty. And so that's kind of our presentation about what to move forward on a permanent thinking basis. But Lewis is going to talk about, in the meantime, we could do some fun things that don't cost a lot of money, just to fix some things.
I think this goes back to,
Louis, before you start, you can say for about an hour and a half.
yes.
Maybe they just take a couple of minutes for a stretch or something.
This isn't very common.
You know, give me 3 minutes and I'll fly through this.
Oh.
Is that okay? I think everything, right?
Okay.
So I think to Jim's point, there's a lot of big ideas, a lot of things. You know, when we talk about streetscapes, redevelopment, a lot of that takes time, lots of capital, and we're not patient people. We're not patient as a society. So one of the ideas here was, where are some places where we could have instant impact, relatively low barrier to entry, low cost methods. When we visited, one of the things that we noticed kind of wandering through town and in the parking lots is the community theater that faces out onto this big, vast asphalt parking lot. It's like, well, what if this became a public space that could be used? Go ahead and flip to the next one. And so what we were suggesting is simply repainting the parking lot. So you could still, go ahead and flip to the next one. You can still park on it. It can still operate just as it is today. There might be some strategic removal of just a couple of spots to add some trees to make it a little more comfortable. But if we use bright colors, bring a little bit of lighting in, when the theater hosts an event, we could let that spill out and do a much kind of bigger, more robust space where, go ahead to the next one. Things like food trucks and other things could show up. And it could be, you know, a nice place that adds just one more place for people to get together, for people to have these bigger events. It's on asphalt, it's inexpensive, it's quick, you can go do it tomorrow. Go ahead. This one, obviously this is a private property, but when we saw this building on 2nd Street, the landscaping building, which is kind of a unique thing to be downtown, right? Tiles and mulch and stuff. But when I saw that building and all of these garage doors and that setback, I said, well, what else could happen here? You know, and obviously this would have to be in conversation with the people who own this property, but go ahead to the next one. Thinking about, what if that got reused? What if that front space became kind of public plaza space with seating and trees? What if there were opportunities for public art? And what if that building itself, those garage doors could just come open, and that was another space for activity, for whether it's a food hall and multiple vendors can come in, or it's a place for a farmer's market sort of thing to kind of happen in a small way more often, or in the winter, you know, to add that activity. So just an idea. And then the last one, we were really taken by the art center. And I think one of the things, we love that building, but it's very hard to know how amazing it is on the inside, and the beautiful art. And we saw this parking lot in the background and really thought hard about how could you bring more outdoor space and bring some of that energy outside. And go ahead. The idea here again is we have this really beautiful scale. What if all we did was we added some posts that were taller, ran some string lights, did some, we could even do like a community competition to do a mural basically on the ground, something that's bright and fun. You could project movies or events, you could have small concerts, you could have art shows, you could do lots of things here, and you're not really doing much. I'd say this was just, along with the streetscape and thinking about temporarily what can we do along the street to make some of these improvements. There are some other pockets that I think if we work with some of these partners, we could have a real impact and create some real vibrant outdoor spaces, as Jim said, are so important.
And this is parking during the day, so it's not.
Right, and if you can still park on it. So we're, not taking parking away, but adding something that's really flexible and functional. And now, take it back. Sorry, thank you.
You take a 45-minute break and then come back and have a Q&A session.
That'd be great.
All right, if we can have you all's attention, we'd like to reconvene real quickly, and if you guys have finished your presentation, then I'd like to just ask the folks who took time out this morning to join this meeting if they have any questions or comments or whatever. Be recognized, and we'll listen to hear what they have to say.
I don't have
Well,
Are you asking people to have questions?
Yes, people in the audience, yes, sir. You all have any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am, you identify who you represent, my ass.
I'm Nikki Kincaid, I'm the director of the Art Center of the Bluegrass. And I've met with you, but I'm not really familiar with this process. So I'm not sure where you're at. Is this are you voting on this? We've seen a lot of different things. Are there phases? And yeah. And then the entertainment district, is that something outside of this as well that will, we will get? I'm a little confused of the next steps, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think it's, think about curating a show, okay? You got a lot of pictures around the wall, and you're looking at, and you're trying to decide what to put up for the show. And we're consultants. We're giving you our ideas for a master plan. Ultimately, this has to be your master plan. The city commissioners have to decide what the way forward is. And they have, it's not fair to ask them now because this is, we call it a draft, but this is a working session to say, okay, here's what we've boiled up. Here are the ideas that we have. We love a lot of this stuff. We'd like to have you get interested in it. But it's ultimately up to them to decide, what, as we go forward. And then it becomes also a matter of how do you implement it? How do you actually accomplish things? And something like the entertainment center, the district, is going to happen quicker than most anything else, probably as soon as you can get it done. So, so there are things like that, but if you kind of know some of the things that are in process, you won't put a power pole in the middle of some place we might do something. Or so it's kind of this is aspirational, as I said. It's if I had the power to do all these things, I would love to do that. But we also are going to concentrate on where the resources come from and how we do that. I mean, and we have a lot of ideas about that. But I don't think it's a matter of trying to make a list right now and put price tags on it and try and decide, oh my God, what are we going to do on this I don't think we're there yet, but we're trying to move this along. So this is the first time any of you all have seen this. So the mayor's seen a lot of it because you've been in some of the meetings, but I think that, you know, it's your leadership of where we go, and how we go, to get to things, and then to decide, you know, what it actually is, or what needs to be schmoozed a little bit, or whatever. So, this is not a fait accompli. This is not our saying, okay, this is your master plan. We're saying, here are a lot of ideas and pieces. This is where we are, and boiling them around, and we want to come up with that, help you define that, but it requires you to do that.
I was gonna ask Earl if he would review the process that's taking place thus far with folks in the community.
Do you want to do that instead, or while you're here?
Yeah, you can jump in if I miss it, but I think you're a perfect example of, and to be perfectly candid, this has been a process unlike any other process I've ever been through because of the offense. I think this went longer and was far more difficult to organize. So I think to Jim's point, keep that working session peace in mind. I think like ideas like this, if this is something that you are either interested in or not, that's exactly the kind of feedback we want to hear, because if you are interested in these kinds of specific ideas, it would ultimately take you and your organization and the city, I think, to buy in and come together and figure out, okay, if we're interested, let's really put some meat into it and figure out how to get it done. If you're not, let's focus somewhere else and do that sort of thing. So I think that kind of feedback is vital and really important. I think for the entire process from our end, which a lot of you probably remember, I can see a lot of familiar eyeballs. We started by doing a lot of research and having a lot of conversations, and I think Jim's kind of synergy map really hit a lot of the high notes about what we heard from the community, and that community has included a lot of conversations with folks downtown proper. Jim has had, I don't even want to know exactly how many meetings,
More than 50.
with individual property owners and institutions, and I was really proud of having Center and the hospital come together. That's pretty rare in a downtown plan to have these major institutions come and participate. I had great conversations with Michael Hughes and the African American Historical Society. We had a lot of conversations with Center and faculty and students, and we tried to coalesce all of those ideas amongst our own personal research and experiences on the ground walking around to develop a lot of this. And that's, honestly, I think where we are today, that's been a long process, mostly because of COVID. It's been extremely difficult to get out and have those kinds of conversations. I think today is mostly about introducing these ideas, lots of ideas, and getting your candid feedback on those. And trying to chart a path forward towards how we can, to Jim's point and Earl's point, it's going to take everybody.
Yeah, the idea, what is a downtown master plan? And the idea that it is a physical layout and say, all right, this is a plan that we're going to build. That is not really what a downtown plan is necessarily. It's a path forward for your community. There's an active part of the plan where the city commission, so we've talked about, so as a draft, they have presented this concept of downtown, a way to work in downtown. We've got this core area where we want to focus on unused land, inefficiently used land. You have this historic district up on Main Street. We've got to think about ways that we enhance that with rules and second floor housing, and then we've got this corridor. And so when you look at all those things in downtown, the city commission, as we go beyond these basic concepts, which is what this is as a working session, the city commission's got to start to digest how do we do that. A big piece of it is how you implement these ideas. So when we, as another example, we talked about engaging Center College, right? Well, how do we do that? Who does that? What character do we have that's going in the community that's going to continue that process? So there's an active part of the plan that's implementation. There's a passive part of the plan that's a great idea for the courthouse. How do we keep the courthouse downtown? Well, we've talked about a structural change to that area. Well, maybe that's something that we talk about. How do we talk about that? City Commission's got to weigh in and give guidance on how we engage that process as a community, right? And so the plan is really designed around corralling all those ideas into a strategy as a community to make us more sustainable as a community as we move forward, right? So that we get an improvement to our environment and an improvement to our economic activity, the ease of our economic activity, the safety of our pedestrians downtown. How does all that happen, right? And so the plan is really not a structural plan. It's more of a vision and an idea, and how does the city commission now start thinking about ways to do that, right? And so as we go through the workshop, some of the things that the commission will be asked or given the opportunity to participate in, and is we need to go to a couple of towns, and we need to visit a couple other places, and really see how they went from point A to point B, right? So we're starting to see some concepts of marrying all these ideas together into some point B, right? Now, there are going to be parts of that will generate a plan of like I say, go back to the courthouse. That may become a project someday. If we talk to the AOC and talk to the courts and try to figure out how that fits in that area, maybe that works. But a big piece of it is how do we get to the point, how do we continue the idea of encouraging residential use in downtown? How do we enhance that as a community? What's other places done? So we need to go talk to some other places, come back, and eventually you'll get to a working document. But the other thing is, and we've talked about the easiest thing to point to, but I want to point to Main Street because we're talking about downtown. Let me jump to that. I got a picture on my wall in there in 1947 at the water plant of downtown. It looks nothing like Main Street does today, right? Or Main Street did 10 years ago when it was a 4-lane, now it's a 3-lane, right? But 47, it had parking on it. It was a totally different environment, right? And the key for us to remember is that things are not finished. Things don't get to a stopping point. Our environment continuously changes over time. And as we move through time, it's going to look different than it does right now, naturally. Just because things get renovated, things change, right? And so, but the plan, the downtown master plan, helps us guide that, provide a tool that we think about with intent, focus, rather than happenstance, right? We want to focus on how we keep the medical area of that. Let's enhance that so that as if a gal needs to, or has a change, or somebody comes in and wants to, let's focus on that. How do we enhance that being medical? Or how do we enhance that Walnut corridor to become something different? What do we do what's the city commission do particularly? And what legal things do they do to enhance that? I hope that makes sense a little bit.
Can you tell folks some of the things that we're going to implement temporarily?
Yes, and so we talked about it so he's talked about doing some of those things temporarily, like some of the striping and things like that. So we are actively working on a couple of those parklets where we install an area, and we talked about it about a month ago at the city commission meeting, where we build something on the street. If you drive down Main Street now, it is totally vehicle centered. There's just wall of cars, driving in the middle, right? And so what we want to do is create the vision of pedestrians down through there also, right? And so rather than doing the streetscape immediately, what we're doing is we're going to try to construct at least 2, maybe 3 parklets where we remove 2 parking spaces and we construct a platform so that you see some seating, you see some umbrellas farther out in the street. You can go to Copper Oak right now, people crave that. And so like, for example, if you're driving up Copper Oak on Saturday, it's packed on that corner. Well, how do we create more usable square footage for seating somewhere? right? So we're gonna try to do some elevated platform adjacent to the street, and we're, as staff, Public Works is working on that right now. They're actively trying to detail those locations. We're trying to start one in the next couple of weeks. They've been doing some background research. Lewis has sent us some good information, and so we're trying to just find out the cost of that. We're narrowing in on that, and so that's happening as we speak. Little things like that, yeah.
But also, I think if you think about Errol's scenario about how downtown has changed over time, and it's 2020 is going to look different than it's going to look 2025. This plan is sort of like a guide to help lead us there. Everything won't get done because it's going to take you and I, city commission, to support the business community to help decide and implement and finance some of those things that are in these plans. And the things in these plans have all come from all the different meetings that they've had with all of our community members. So these is not the city commissioner's plan, it's the community's plan, which is sort of the driving force behind getting something organized. So if somebody wants to come today and do something different downtown, well, we're hoping to have a plan to say, does this or does this not meet what our future plans have been directed to by the community.
Right, and it goes from 0 to all the way to the 100-foot level. So 0 is on, for example, on 2nd Street, we have what it is there now. So then there's the idea of this park, maybe, because there's existing green space there that we want to preserve. And so as you go past that, what do you do with that? What's the theme of that park, right? The 100-foot mark, which conversations and meetings with the local community steered him, ended up with Michael Hughes. Now he's got this great idea, and they coincidentally, that Michael has a space on 2nd Street that he's actively trying to renovate and to occupy, right? So suddenly that starts that whole theme of this new park. So you went from 0 to with nothing to a concept now. What the city commission's got to figure out how to do is to continue to push that into a fruition, into reality.
And,
Right.
and you connect the 2nd Street Museum with the library and come around the loop to your place, the Art Center, because all 3 locations will have some very important things about the future of this community, both for black, brown, and whatever other people. So that's part of the concept. Having us all connected so that I'll know what you're doing, and they'll know what you're doing as well. Part of my issue with downtown Danville is that I don't have any one spot where I can go find out what's going on downtown. It's gotten better now, I can find out. But like there was an event in Constitution Square, Saturday at 6 o'clock, very few folks in town knew about it. It was, I'm not on his Facebook page, so I didn't know what was going on. I just, by happen chance, I found out about it. So it's about connecting all that as well. So physical change is also informational communication change will be a part of the process as well.
And then, for example, the entertainment districts, run back to that for a second. So it started out as 0, just one of the things that spurred out of COVID. And those, so they've looked at it and we've gone from no idea to this overall boundary that now so one of the meetings we had is with businesses downtown. And where we talked about how do you implement an entertainment district? Because we've got to worry about Tommy Gregory police with street closings, but we've got to maintain access to the hospital emergency room. So the reason it's broken out into 5 districts is there's this idea that maybe we can just do an art center activation of that sub-district. So that 4th Street's closed, so that we know all this other transportation questions, all those go away. And so that you can close that footprint, and then we can walk around, and it gives the art center an opportunity to have a broader event inside of Whisker Park, and it flows in and out of the art center freely, right? And so then you've got another district where if you want to have some sort of street event on Main, that you can just close Main inside of 3rd or 4th, and you can move freely from Jane Barleycorns to Copper and Oak with an event occurring on Main Street or out of Whisker Plaza moving into Main Street. So then you've got this. That's completely a different style of event than than you would have moving out of Art Center, right?
We wouldn't have to close streets, right? They could just do this on sidewalks.
No, each entertainment district has to consider, because one of the keys is you can't have alcohol in a street or crossing a street. So when you activate the district, you're activating one of those 5 parts so that you comply and it becomes functional, right? So now that they've developed this concept and come up with this idea, then we have to come back together as staff. So what's the city do? So we're hearing that, so now we've got to develop an ordinance, we have to develop administrative guidelines, we have to come up with, do we have bracelets, or do we have cups? You know, all the minutia detail that goes into implementation. So the plan, the downtown master plan, has come up with a concept at 0, and we've come up with 100 now because we've got this broken up. Now, city commission has to take that and move forward with something. And so we've got to engage ABC, we've got to come back to the downtown businesses, and we've got to say, okay, this is the direction we're heading, what are the nuances, operating hours, what does it take to activate it, what's going to be the fee kind of activating it, where does the permit go to, does it go to ABC or does it go to the police department? There's many layers to actually doing that now. But as staff, we feel good that this is a workable plan that we can start to do those things with. That makes sense.
And that was a very detailed answer to your question. Are there other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Tell us who you are.
My name is Lisa Thompson, and I'm a board member for the Heart of Danville, which is your Main Street program. And so, you know, the mission of Main Street is to enhance, preserve, promote the livability and the vitality of downtown. So I'm really glad that the city's taking this next step to put together this plan. And I hope that the Main Street program will be part of, you know, any future discussions or implementation that needs to help take place, because we're a grassroots organization and we have lots of people in this community that support the Main Street program. But my question really is about the fire station and the hotel. And I know you kind of sort of skipped through the new location for the fire station, but it sort of dawned on me while I was listening to you that you also talked about how we should look at future Main Street or even any kind of future development, and we should obviously design buildings that are closer to the curb, that are more pedestrian oriented. So when I look at the new proposed fire station, it sort of sits back off the curb. It's obviously going to have trucks running in and out. And then adjacent to that, there's the place where the Orange Leaf building is, which is also a very sort of suburban design. But yet you're talking about building a hotel across the street where people are going to be sleeping, and there's fire trucks running in and out making a lot of noise. Did you look at the potential of relocating the fire station to like Walnut Street and maybe building this hotel and this community center in that space? Just a question.
Well, I don't have any control over the fire station.
I would say that's a question for the city, not for the
Well, I mean, he's just sort of thinking big picture, and he's, you know, it's like Monopoly. He's moving the little places on the board, and I just wondered if he even reimagined
Well, keep
where.
in mind now, he's not moving places on the board. We are as a community. But to your question about the fire station more specifically is that we probably looked at about 7, 8, 9 different sites.
Total 14 originally.
Was it 14? And based on give and take and based on finances.
In negotiations.
Well, and it's going to be located where it's going to be located. That was the best. The commission decided that was the best location for the community.
Well, and the thing is too, the fire station is on Main Street, right? And in terms of, it's in an area where you do have city hall right next to it. So that is not residential. If you caught some of those nuances when you talk about moving residential focus, you're looking at that Walnut Street corridor really being this more of the central location for residential use, right? And so moving the fire station on there is not necessarily in concert with what he's already described, right? So you're talking about trying to enhance walkability and livability off of Main Street in that Walnut Street corridor as one of the things in that little area. So you're really trying to balance all those things. The location of the fire station geographically matters for the service area. I know that's a block away, but 400 feet one direction, right? And so that moves a bigger picture around. So yeah, I would say all those things have been talked about, but one of the things that Jim made a point, I asked him to talk about this real quick, and then we can come back to that if you want, but talk about the investment. What are we trying to do investment-wise?
Well, yeah, and I think, I don't think the purpose of this meeting is to get into all the financing, and there's later meetings that we'll talk about that, but I do, to your point, Earl, all of this and all of the stuff you saw today is meant to incentivize people to do some things. And I would say that of this plan, not any more than half of the investment is going to be government investment. What we've got to do is to get private investment and philanthropic investment, the 3 Ps. Nothing gets done on any project hardly ever that we work on these days without the 3 Ps. Public, private, philanthropic. So, it takes the the naming of things and all of that, but it's important that you set out a vision and that people get on board, they get interested in something, There could be a rich alumni, a center that might want to put their name on that town center. So, what we're trying to do is make it interesting, make the future of Danville interesting and possible. And it's not to try to define things that hurt or make things worse, but to try to make things better, but it's also trying to incentivize and attract. And so we want to attract investment, and to do that, usually what cities do, counties do, is they do what I call set the table. They set the table for this other stuff to happen. And do some things to start the ball rolling that gets other people then to follow up. It is very important that we understand sequentially what the priorities are too. At some point in time, we're nowhere near that right now. This is a stew of stuff that we showed you here today. I understand that, and I know it might be kind of hard to comprehend, but it is, it's just like, let's talk about the restaurants. I've been to several towns kind of researching that, have done a lot of reading, and why we talk about restaurants and bars, that they are sort of the scouting party for development downtown. They started. It's happened in 20 different communities. I can leave a list for you if you want to check on. And that is where you not have one, not just Copper and, what is it? Oak. And not just Harvey's. And not that, but if you have a cluster of 6, then you have a movement that begins to go. And the irony of it is, Harvey's and Copper and Oaks do better with the other 4 here. You see what I'm saying? I mean, there's a synergy about that. It's like in Louisville, it's like Bardstown Road or Frankfurt Avenue. I mean, it's like once you get them started, and all of a sudden, I mean, I live near Bardstown Road. There are 26 really fine restaurants within walking distance of my house. And of course, they're struggling right now. But I think that we have to be clever, and I think the idea of going and looking at some other cities is a good idea, but it's also good to maybe bring some people. I'm going to try to get maybe a couple seminars together, and Cash is up already with talking, but like for, you're going to do some of this incentivizing and some of this, get some things done by the private sector, and to start prime the pump for investment. What's often offered is a development loan or a mezzanine loan for somebody who wants to do it. Let's say somebody wants to go ahead and put 8 apartments in their downtown building. There are ways to put them in touch with people who know how to do that. There's ways to get the financing, and there's ways so there's a downtown development fund that does revolving loans that incentivize, and they get paid back. And when they're paid back, that money gets lent out again, and it's handled by your banks. And it can be all kinds of participants. And most cities, the participants involved, the city puts in some money, the banks put up a good part of the money, and sometimes local industries or businesses will put a stake in just as a community. But the banks have to fulfill, some federal regulations about community loans, and this is a good way for them to do that. So, we're gonna bring in somebody who's gonna talk to you about, in Louisville, who's headed up that for I don't know, 15, 20 years, to a long time, Louis Straw, who's anxious to come down and talk to you folks and tell you how that works and what the benefits are, how much help it can be. And without a master plan, I've worked on a master plan 30 years ago now for Louisville, and we wouldn't have a waterfront park, we wouldn't have a lot of things that we have if we hadn't done that master plan and set out some goals that seemed impossible at the time. How could you ever take all that industry and sand piles and all that along the river and turn that into a park? It could never get done. It got done. So if you have a plan, it doesn't get it done, but you guys can get it on that point. And it is also, we talked about this cluster of restaurants. I'm not a restaurant man, but I do know some people who are, who started restaurants and been successful. And maybe we can corral them into coming down here and spending a day and meeting with some of your folks and talking about what it would take to incentivize somebody so we could get foreign restaurants down here. Because if we can do that, then some of this other stuff starts to happen. Now, everybody wants a hotel. Well, this is going to look better to a hotel company than no plan at all. And if we could do the town center, that's a slam dunk kind of thing for the hotel, because that's the convention center next door. That's a big deal. So I mean, these things are all tied together, and it's how we do some things ourselves, and then we, hey, let me do these other things. So part of this is getting people interested and getting people. There are a lot of people that follow things, a lot of people that have money, and a lot of it is just getting them interested in doing something. And right now, there's no reason to think about building housing downtown. But if we make a big thing about it and make it so important to the community, then some of the developers in the area probably say, well, I'll give it a try. We've talked to a couple of property owners, and they are interested. So,
And I think it's going to be really important and vital to us that when we do have all these follow-up meetings, that we do a better job of communicating the fact that to the public that we're trying to have open meetings. This was not found out publicized very well, it's all being open, but you all found out and showed up and appreciate that. And I think that these other meetings, we'd like to maybe come back and listen to the knowledge that we're going to try to gain ourselves. And then with that said, before I adjourn this meeting, is there anyone else who has another question? Mr. Hunter?
You guys have the slide that shows your character districts now, but this is something that gets down to the weeds a little bit, but I want to see if you guys can give us some direction on something, on your boundaries that you're proposing.
there's one that shows all of the districts?
Yeah, all the districts. Where you're proposing. So, the initial master plan scope boundary showed that kind of T-shaped. And clearly, I've seen this, and Earl and I just had to deal with this last week or so. It appears those boundaries, or those shaded areas are getting a little broader than that original boundary. And the city, I think smartly so, enacted a moratorium, and we tied it in with the original master plan boundary. And we just last week had a project where someone was looking at building a building that's probably out of that T boundary, but probably is in that shaded boundary. So if that is in a sense becoming the new master plan boundary, I would think maybe the city commission wants to somehow formally attach that to that moratorium, or if we're far enough along in the draft to say that is the boundary, we just somehow officially recognize that, because we're literally, I'm meeting with someone tonight about a 5-acre tract that literally is in one of those shaded areas, but it's not in that original T boundary. And if there's a project that comes in tomorrow, again, we signed off on a building permit the other day that we thought was not in the scope of the moratorium, but we're getting we're dodging bullets here, if something comes in tomorrow, as this plan evolves over time, and we start to implement it, if that is the boundary, I don't know, we can clarify that, let the city commission take some kind of formal action on that, or maybe tie it into a second moratorium if we have to extend it somehow, but there's a couple of projects in the pipeline that are in those shaded areas. And maybe because center is so big, it's not that, but if you guys think the boundaries expanded a little bit, I guess just want some clarity on that. And then me and Earl actually used this exhibit the other day for a project and determined one of them was outside boundary.
Well, we can
Or-
allow exceptions, right? Or, how would we need to handle that, or?
Well, I'm not sure what the boundary officially is right now in the consultant's mind, or if we, if we got a little broader than just that T shape that was in the original proposal.
Yeah, it comes down, like.
The original boundary scope, you showed it on the slide, and I think that's what we've attached to the moratorium. And that was the original scope, and I'm glad to see that we're broadening it out a tad bit.
Well, in the slide that he just showed, that's the original T map.
That's the original boundary.
Right.
But some of those character zones are now getting outside of that a tad bit.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious what we do if a permit comes in right where we're planning, let's say, to build one of those parks or on the east side of town.
Yeah, so what, we provided that map with the moratorium, what Steve is identifying as planning and zoning definitely, is that there's areas like that south corridor area where that full boundary is gonna be impacted from a planning and zoning perspective.
Well, I'm saying Grant and Russell, good example,
Right.
of their character zones, you guys are pulling that in.
Right.
We don't wanna just turn loose a duplex tomorrow. The goal here is to put some kind of other density housing into the future.
So one of the things I might ask tonight during that city manager report is, do you all want me to bring back a revision of this boundary for the moratorium until we continue to work through those planning and zoning things? So that's a question I would ask tonight.
Well,
So that's how you would react to it.
My question to you guys, is that character, is it, in your mind, is that now the new boundary, or you just sort of describe those characters, but you see a hard edge boundary within those character zones? I guess that's what I'm.
Well, it'd be hard for me to answer that question, Mr. Hunter, because I just saw the new.
No, I meant for the consultants.
He's looking at the
I'm
consultants.
not the consultants.
oh.
What do you guys see as your boundary, your scope as you're studying? I guess that's what-
Well, I think it really just started as a way for us to understand the city and how it works and that sort of thing. But I think your question is a really important one because, we wouldn't want to cut off our nose to spite our face, if you will, if there are recommendations that are coming, but I don't know.
Well, the question is, do you adapt your moratorium area to a more specific area that is broader, that reflects your character zones? And so then we would have to go through a process where we dial that in. So I'll ask that tonight.
Well, this,
We'll talk about that a little bit more.
this, yes, I would treat it a little separately than the others, because that would be more of a planned unit development and not be,
Well, on the east side of your T on Main Street, your character area goes a little broader than that boundary right there.
Yep.
On the east side, and then on the 4th Street side to the west. That's,
well, this is not the original T.
well, that's what I guess I'm getting at. We have a moratorium that's contingent on a boundary.
It included, no, it didn't include buffering?
I don't think it went all that far.
It went, I know it went all the way over here,
But on 4th, for example, we
but it
don't
did
know-
not include any of this.
That's right.
And I think that, the center character district is what it is, I mean, center property.
So can you have that tonight? Can you have that diagram?
Well, I'd like to ask Mr. Hunter, I guess.
Yeah, I'll figure something
Question too.
for sure.
The two proposals that you're referencing,
Well, we had to, there was a
I
permit
mean,
that
let me
came
finish
into
my
our
question.
office. There was
they don't, are you suggesting that those two projects don't fit these designations?
Yeah, for
Don't
sure.
you suggest, okay, let's get that.
We had to turn loose a permit the other day. I'll call it industrial style, storage building style building, maybe it becomes an office, but it's west of the original boundary in a commercial zone that, we couldn't stop the permit because it's not under the threshold of the moratorium because it's not in the boundary. Is it going to be detrimental to the project? Maybe not, but I don't think it's something you all envisioned us continuing to build in this planned area. And so that permit, we just verified it, we used this boundary, we also looked at the character map, but, knowing if that's exactly 500 foot off the curb of Fourth Street, we just had to make a rough call and say, we're gonna turn this permit loose on a 6,000 square foot building. Metal building, it is what it is. Now, I just wanna make sure the character areas are starting to redefine the boundary. I think it'd be kind of cool if at this point in time, we know where we're going, we could tie that in or say this is the new boundary, and then we can attach it to the moratorium if we need to.
Yeah. And so we'll come up with a way to ask that tonight. And, Steve's right. I mean, and that's a good thought, which he's good with that kind of stuff, definitely. And so that's,
I don't know,
it's
this is the,
definitely a reasonable question to ask that. Yeah.
He's Russell Street.
well, the one we did was on Dillahay.
No, it's south of there.
It was
That's where he's talking about.
Dillahay.
Okay. He's already got some. Yeah, yeah.
All right, well, yeah, that's why we gotta have these meetings, because these things are gonna come up in the middle of this process, and I can't vote. I wouldn't wanna vote today and try to say I accept the 5 areas, it was the first time I look at them, I'm not looking at the street and what's here or there. It'll take a little bit more time on the city commissions, so I think I'm speaking for one commission, not for everybody else, but,
I would request that we get all of this
yeah.
in a packet, and
Right.
we can process and make our notes.
I send a PowerPoint to us, electronically, saying that tree, but I don't know that's what I can take a look at. What I've seen here is what I would say to the community, that I'm impressed and I'm excited, because it is gonna give us some direction. Do I agree with all of it? We can't say that. First look.
Well, the participation has been really good. A lot of people have had a lot of ideas, and I think most everyone is open to, maybe some of these ideas are a little out of the box, but that's okay, because it all kind of comes together in the end, so.
The work continues even during COVID.
Yes.
That's where still in COVID, but then we're trying to sort of open up a little bit. Good work done. Other questions from,
Mr. Atkins,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
have one. It's not a question, it's not a comment on the content, it's on the content of the logistics of the meeting.
yes, ma'am.
Nowhere on the agenda for this particular meeting was there any indication that it would not be on YouTube. There was no indication that it was open to the public. I assumed it was going to be on YouTube, but was surprised to find it wasn't, and then went to the agenda and found out it's in this room. And because I'm an aggressive person, as you know, I tracked you all down and came in anyway. But there's nothing to indicate to the public that, and this is a meeting that's so important to the public. It's not routine. This is information that the public is interested in, that the public's had information on, and it's one that should have been advertised, either open to the public or being in a place where you could take it for, live stream it for YouTube. I understand everything is a challenge during COVID, but I really think this was an important meeting that the public would like to have some, if not input, just direct information from. So I'm highly disappointed that the city couldn't have put out more information about this. Won't be on YouTube, this will be on YouTube, this, some information so the public would know how to access this particular meeting. I also understand that it's being taped, but that it will not be a high enough quality taping, maybe for the public to look at it later. So this is very disappointing. I hope if you have another meeting on the downtown master plan, that it will be implemented in such a way that either the public can see it, can view it, live streaming, or even view it in a quality tape later. But really, I'm disappointed that I had to come out of my comfortable home and fly down here and be with y'all. Thank you.
Well, I think that's a comment that we should take it very seriously. All of our meetings in this time frame have been live streamed, and I don't know why this one is different, but we do apologize and accept that recommendation, and it might be the basement, I don't know, but we'll find out, and if that's the case, we'll move upstairs and we'll make sure that we continue to do the social distancing, and we'll try to live stream it. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
Can the PowerPoint be maybe put on the website so people can have access to it?
Yes, ma'am, we're gonna do that, but it's something about the quality of the videotape and stuff down here, so we're
Right,
gonna.
but no, but I mean this PowerPoint.
Oh, the PowerPoint, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it doesn't bother me.
I need to ask the owners of it, I don't know. Is that okay?
We'll figure that out.
Okay, all right.
Thank
Again,
you.
great suggestion.
Make one more comment back to Nikki and kind of wondering the process here. You know, it wasn't too long ago that we did the Parks and Rec Master Plan and approved it. And it doesn't happen overnight, but some things are happening, and it does give us kind of a guideline of where we want to go down the road. And certainly things change. Yeah, so.
But that suggestion for the art center, that just wowed me this morning, but that's pretty neat. Again, and not very expensive.
That's something we could almost do immediately.
Well, not us, see, I can't get it out of the 5 of us, and get it out of the community, I don't want to do all the work, I might show up.
I mean, us as a
Okay,
community.
all right. Well,
But we happen to own that building,
I know,
correct?
we should be clarifying, define us, right? Okay. If all minds are clear, and they say we're out of 10, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting. No more.
There you go.
Second.
And all those in favor of adjournment, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, say no. Let's go. Thank you, guys.